we go through the checklist, and this is what I recommend people do on their own. Okay, how's my relationship with my significant other going? How the kids doing? How's my work doing? How about my life goals, friendships? And one of those areas, invariably, they say, well, this happened, but it wasn't that big a deal.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Radiant Woman. Today, I have Reneau Peurifoy. I'm hoping that I've said that right.
100%.
Okay. And he holds a master's degree in counseling and is the author of Anxiety, Phobias, and Panic, Taking Charge and Conquering Fear, that has sold over 200,000 copies. Now, the audio version of this book and his second book, The Anger Taming the Beast, have just been released by Nightingale Content and are now available on audible.com. Reneau was in private practice for 20 years as a therapist specializing in anxiety disorders. His newest book is Why You Feel the Way You Do. Reneau also has developed a YouTube channel, that features videos on a variety of practical life skills. Reneau, thank you so much for coming on and welcome.
Thank you for having me.
All right, so reading by your bio, obviously one of the things, because you've written a book about it and being in practice for 20 years, you know this well, is anxiety. And it's something that we all have experienced at some point in our life, whether it's something that has influenced the way we live or we just experience it, we all know about it. So can you tell us what is anxiety?
Well, anxiety is something that everybody experiences. It's a response to a threat, and you basically have two responses to threat. One is anger and the other is fear. And when I use anger and fear, those words, I'm using them in a very broad sense. So anger can range from irritation to rage, and anxiety can range from just apprehension to panic. And so it's a normal thing. You're getting ready for a job interview, you got a big test coming up, or there's something on TV that's scary. We've all experienced anxiety. It's a normal part of life, and it only becomes a problem if it's preventing you from doing normal activities.
Okay, so everybody has anxiety. So it's not necessarily for everyone something that can be debilitating, or it's not something that's even bad. That's what it sounds like. It's just part of life.
It's a normal part of our emotional network, and it's very protective. It helps to alert you to danger when there's something going on that in the past your subconscious mind is associated with danger. Then again, depending upon how you assess the danger, you'll become anxious or you'll become angry. And a lot of that has to do with as you grew up and also your belief systems you developed. You associate danger with different things and your capacity to deal with it. If you feel you can manage the threat, then you tend to become irritated up to anger and you want to get rid of the threat. If the threat seems like it's going to be too much for you to manage, then you'll become anxious or afraid and you want to get away from the threat.
Okay. And in fact, anxiety is a good thing to have in our lives. I guess, as you said, that keeping us out of danger and just keeping us safe.
Right, and for thousands of years, that's what's protected people, right? Alert, you get into a situation, and sometimes at an unconscious, sometimes at an unconscious level, you've picked up something's going on that you need to be aware of, and so it makes you conscious, makes you aware of possible danger, and that's a good thing. And of course, the bad thing is when it becomes overwhelming or when it's being triggered by things that are actually safe. And I dealt a lot with people that had panic attacks, panic disorder, and in that case, they were having this massive anxiety response when there was no danger. And these anxiety attacks seem to come out of the blue. There doesn't seem to be any reason for them. There actually is, but it's not apparent to the person at the time.
Okay. And so obviously the reaction in terms of a panic attack or anxiety attack, that's the obvious difference as opposed to someone
Right.
who's not having the panic attack but yet still feel anxious. Um, but how is it different in terms of how our body responds? Why do we have a panic attack? Panic attack as opposed to just an anxious
Right.
response.
Well, first of all, everybody's had a panic attack, except they haven't called it that. I mean, I can think of a couple times when I've been driving, just gotten a near accident, or if you talk to people that are firemen or, police officers, they've just been on a chase and that adrenaline, or an athlete, they'll have that adrenaline going on in their body. Only
Yeah.
in those cases, there's an obvious reason why your body's reacting that way. So with panic attacks, they seem to be just coming out of the blue, but actually there is a reason. Because when you
Yes.
people who get these, they have a different wiring. Everything that
Mhm.
people have, you can graph on what they call the normal curve. So like the height of people, there are tall people, there are short people, there's an average height, then it graphs out on the old normal curve. And so with the reactivity of your nervous system, it's the same thing. Some people have very reactive nervous systems, and some people you got to slap them upside the head to get them to notice something, right? And so you get
Right.
somebody with one of these, and I kind of compare it to a house where the wiring's not quite up to code. You plug too many things in,
Mm.
and the circuit breakers trip. So when you talk to somebody who's had panic attacks, I'll ask them, so what was going on in your life when they first started? And they'll have a whole lot of things going on. Well, I was going to school, I was working full time, and my fiance called it off, or my parent got sick, or this happened, and my child got sick. And I don't understand why I reacted that way. And in actuality, all they were having was a massive stress reaction. But because oftentimes their personality is that they need to do things well, they tend to ignore their body. They don't understand that that's what's going on, and so, oh my gosh, what's going? This, I don't understand it. And then once that happens, they start watching their body. They start noticing signs of possible anxiety, or anticipating it when they go to places where they've been anxious before, and now they start self-generating it, and it becomes what's called a conditioned response. Oh, Pavlov's dogs, you ring the bell when you're feeding them, and pretty soon you can ring the bell and they'll salivate. And just thinking about situations where they've had a panic attack will now oftentimes bring it on through that same conditioned response learning.
Okay. So, t- um, to clarify, you said the person who has those panic attacks or anxiety attacks is wired differently, and so in terms of their response system is hyper alert, I guess. Um,
Well, yeah,
and so,
they have more stuff coming in, and actually, it's a good quality. It's the thing about them that their mates and their friends like, because they tend to be more empathetic. They tend to read people better. It's just that it's easier for them to get overloaded.
yes, okay, yeah. And so when you're talking about being wired differently, what do you actually mean? What is wired differently, or what is you know um,
They're just a more sensitive, reactive person than the average person. And again, some
okay,
people do math better, some people don't, some people are stronger, and this group of people just tends to have a more reactive nervous system. So, again, like I said, it's a good thing in terms of their being more empathetic, of being able to really tune into people. Oftentimes they're the life of the party. Uh, but again, like a house where the wiring's not up to code, if they get too many things going on at the same time, they can have an exaggerated stress reaction, which is all a panic attack is. It's just the fight or flight mechanism getting overreacting.
okay.
Hmm.
And so if a person has experienced a few panic attacks, and as you said now
Hmm.
has built up um,
Hmm.
to repertoire, is there anything that they can do to help reduce it or minimize it or get rid of it altogether?
Well,
Or, I guess,
yes, and in fact, that's the reason I enjoyed working with panic disorder, is people get better. And when I first
hmm,
started practicing, most of the people I saw had been going on for like 20 years because it really wasn't known that well. And the nice thing is that towards the end of my practice, I had people coming in where their first panic attack was only a few months, maybe 6 months or 3 months before they saw me, and that was great because that was a fairly easy turnaround. And
yeah,
the steps are, number one, that they need to understand what's going on. Now, understanding
hmm,
does not change anything. A lot of our
yeah,
psychology is insight oriented. If you understand it, it'll all be better. That's not the way it works. But people do a lot of what ifing, right? I don't understand why, or why questioning. Why is this happening to me? I don't understand it, and they get stuck that. So you need to be able to have a simple answer. This is happening because I'm the sensitive person, and I've talked myself into this conditioned response. Then
Right.
they need to learn various relaxation tools. I used a relaxation response tape that I would typically give them, and it's kind of like mindfulness or meditation. It's very similar. And essentially, they would put their two fingers and thumb together while they're listening to it, and that becomes a cue-controlled relaxation response they can do out in the field, and it helps to trigger it. In fact, when my wife, when we did her pregnancies for both of our kids, we did that type of an anchor for her. So after her contractions, I could touch her knee or shoulder and say, relax, and she would relax completely. And with practice, it gets pretty good. It doesn't solve everything, but it takes the edge off. You also work with your breathing, because a lot of times they'll overbreathe. So you do the old military breathing where you breathe in through your nose and out through your mouth, slowly. And then you do distraction, because you cannot have a panic attack if you're completely externalized, focusing on something, which is what we typically are. We usually are watching outside of ourselves. We're not watching ourselves. And the interesting thing is, I would often ask people, I would say this to people, and I'd say, I bet you've had an experience where something happened that was kind of an emergency, and you took care of the emergency, and then you had a panic attack. They would tell me all these different stories about, oh yeah, my friend, they fell down, they cut themselves, I had to get them to the hospital, and and all this stuff, and then I got home, and man, I had this panic attack. And it's because while they were taking care of the emergency, they were externalized. Once the emergency was over or it calmed down, now they could look at what was going on, the adrenaline response, and start to tell themselves the scary things and have a self-generated panic attack. So those are the initial tools. A lot of times people also have thinking patterns like should-must thinking, a lot of should-must rules. A lot of circular questioning. Negative anticipation is a big one. This what-if thinking. For example, people would a common fear for them, and this can be used for anything, even if like public speaking or whatever. And that's where a person would say, well, what if I have a panic attack when I go to the store, right? So you go through a number of steps. Number one, how likely is it for you to have a panic attack when you go to the store? And my typical response I would get back is, well, it's probably 50, 60%. So then I would ask them, so how many times have you how many times have you passed out? I mistake there. One of the fears is I'm going to hyperventilate and pass out. So how likely is it that you're going to pass out when you go to the store? Well, it's very likely. So the next question is, so how often have you passed out? Well, I've never passed out. So what they're doing is something called emotional reasoning. And people who are warriors do that a lot. When they have a what if in their head, because it generates emotion, they automatically jump to the conclusion that it's very likely when based on reality, it's not. So whether you're just a general warrior or whether you're worrying about something like passing out, the first thing is look at the track record. How likely is it to actually happen based on reality? Then the second thing, of course, is how bad would it be? Well, of course, if I passed out in a store, it would be on a scale of 1 to 10, it would be probably a 12, the worst thing I can imagine. So then you come back and you say, so on our scale of 1 to 10, if 10 is, your child getting killed or you getting your arm cut off or something like that, how bad is passing out in the store compared to that? And of course, now it comes way down the scale, right, on awfulness. But again, a person's doing emotional reasoning, right? It's definitely going to happen, going to be the worst thing in the world. So they have to get that reasoning part of the brain to start to do a more realistic assessment. Then the next step, and this again goes for any kind of a what if, what could you do to prevent that? Well, I could eat something before, I do better. They come up with various things they can do. And then if you were to pass out, what could you do? Well, first thing I'd want to do is sit down so I don't hurt myself. If I did pass out because of hyperventilation, it'd only be a few minutes. So I could have something to say, such as, well, I'm not been feeling too good, but I'm okay. It's, you don't have to get an ambulance or anything. Just let me rest for a minute and then I'll be fine. And then you take all of that thinking that the person has done and you compress it into 1 or 2 sentences. Well, it's not likely that I'm going to pass out based on reality. It's not the end of the world. Embarrassment, yeah, but heck, I've been embarrassed before. I got a plan for preventing it. I got a plan for taking care of it. And now whenever the thought comes up, they repeat their coping self-statement and they externalize, they focus on something else. And this works for all kinds of different phobias and fears and stuff when you're dealing with the anxieties. In fact, when we would go out and practice, whether it was driving or whatever, we would take every one of their what ifs and we would come up with that's kind of a plan, an assessment, and compress it into a coping self-statement. People who deal with anxiety just naturally because their parents modeled good behavior in this area, they tend to do this just automatically. They take a realistic assessment of the odds and the awfulness. They think about what they could do to prevent and what they would do to cope with it, and they move on. And it's a very kind of a quick process. But people who do emotional reasoning get caught up in those first two areas. It's definitely going to happen, and it's going to be the worst thing in the world.
Right. So I guess the not having differentiate between kind of reality and what's happening in the mind, it's what we think will happen, as opposed to someone who is, well, that could happen, but I'm going to deal with it when it does, or I feel stressed about it, but it's not. I'm trying to regulate it, kind of thing.
It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Now, having all that done, you still will have that conditioned response going on because that becomes an unconscious response. And this is, again, something that because so much of our self-help books are insight-oriented, just because you understand a conditioned response doesn't stop it. Whether we're talking PTSD or whatever. It's kind of like if I hook you up to a wire and every time I say purple, I give you a shock, pretty soon you're going to start jerking around every time I say purple. Now I can dismantle the equipment. I explain to you I'm never going to shock you again, and you can believe me, but I guarantee you the next time I say purple, you're going to respond because it's an unconscious response, and you have to desensitize to it, which means if you have things you've been avoiding, you have to go out and practice them and manage the anxiety while you're practicing. So you'll have some discomfort, but you try to keep it at a level that's manageable, and you go out and do things. And if a person is really severely limited, then you start with easy things first, kind of master those things and build up to it. So they get a repertoire of understanding that I can be anxious and I'm not going to die. It's not going to kill me. It's just anxiety. It's an uncomfortable experience, but I can manage it. And with practice, the tools become better and better, and they work better and better.
Right. So I guess having that person face their fears essentially, or face whatever it is, they're working through, but on a smaller, some little micro steps to the point where they're feeling uncomfortable, but it's not out of control, where they feel like they can't get a hold of it anymore.
Yeah, really bad cases. I had one lady up in the foothills, and she was totally housebound. So like her first project was getting to the mailbox, right? And then eventually, she expanded out into her little local city and can then start traveling more and more. And that would be an extreme case. A lot of people, they have less limitations, but you start with on the easy end so that you can practice your skills, get confidence in them, and then you build up on that. And then there's another part to it, is that with conditioned response patterns, and especially conditioned emotional responses like what we're talking about, they do sometimes get reactivated, especially when you're sick, hungry, tired, or stressed. And that's true for any old behavior, right? And that's because your reasoning processes are diminished at those times. And
Why is that?
another key thing to understand is that emotions are messages, and they're messages about needs that you need to take care of. So I would frequently have somebody come back, a year or so later, and they might say, well, I don't understand. I've been having some of that anxiety stuff coming back again, and I don't know where it's coming from. So we go through the checklist, and this is what I recommend people do on their own. Okay, how's my relationship with my significant other going? How the kids doing? How's my work doing? How about my life goals, friendships? And one of those areas, invariably, they say, well, this happened, but it wasn't that big a deal. Because they're just sweeping it under the rug, right? And so your emotional response is telling you it is a big deal, take care of it. And in that response, having one of these reactive bodies is kind of a blessing in disguise, because it forces you to have what I call short accounts. You can't avoid stuff. If there's a relationship issue or something going on, you need to deal with it. Because if you don't deal with it, it's going to be down there underneath pushing at you and just generating more and more anxiety.
Okay. You mentioned that while we are, feeling hungry or tired or something like that, that our emotional responses are, I guess, slower or less. Why is that? Why
More,
does something,
more exaggerated, actually.
oh, more
Because
exaggerate? Okay.
you have less of that cognitive override on it, right? I mean, everybody knows that
Right.
who has kids, right? When do your kids act up the most? It's when they're sick or retired, right? The great evils of
Yes.
children. And the same thing with adults. When do adults misbehave the most? When they're sick, hungry, tired, right? Or they got some stressor going
Yeah.
on. Because again, your conscious cognitive part of your mind is not working as well as it normally does. And so those old response patterns will sometimes be triggered. And oftentimes when old patterns get triggered, that's all is a message that you're not taking care of yourself the way you need to. Or maybe you need to start doing some stress management because the stress, whatever you're going through at that time, is becoming severe for you.
Okay. Right. So I guess when we are starting to feel that anxiety, especially if we have dealt with it in the
Mm.
past, is looking at our lives and looking at how we're taking care of ourselves and what are some of the stress um, factors that might have come in recently, or that are making us feel like this again. So it's not necessarily that again there's something wrong with us or anything like that. It's just life is having an influence on us.
And this is actually true for everybody. It may not be anxiety. It might be anger, or it might be, one of the things that I used to joke about is there's a change in how I use language, and you have to understand my dad was a sailor, right? So, and oftentimes that's just an indication that I'm sick, I'm retired, or there's some stressors going on in my life. And another thing that I'll do is I'll just spend a lot of time kind of playing some mindless game on the computer. And those
Mhm.
are messages to me that I need to take a look at, my primary relationship, kids, work, life goals, friendships. There's something in my life going on that I need to take care of. And so whenever something out of the unusual is going on with you and you're having an emotional response, oftentimes, again, it's just a message that you got some business to take care of. Identify what the business is and address it. I mean,
Okay.
that's a lot of what
So
counselors do, right? Is we listen to people and we help them identify what the issue is, so they can now deal with it. And if you can do that on your own, then it's great.
yeah, I mean, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Um, what is so if we so we're starting to feel something. So we're recognizing, okay, so something I should be having and taking inventory, I say,
Mm-hmm.
of your life, having a look at what could be a stress factor, or what
Mm-hmm.
doesn't isn't sitting right or optimal. And there are instances where we can't do anything about it. Let's
Right.
say someone is sick. And it's just they're sick and they are could be terminal or something like that, and there isn't anything you can do about it. You just have to ride out the process, but the process could be very long.
Well, it's true.
Um,
And again, I went through, my mom had a long decline. But when stuff like that happens, it also means that you need to do a little bit more self care, right? In order for you to be able to address that situation, maybe you need to pull back from some of your activities. You need to pull on some of your friendships. If you've got a significant other, lean on him or her more. So some of those types of things that you may not do as much when everything's going well, you need to start, doing some of those self-care things that maybe you don't normally do as heavily. Eating right,
right,
sleeping
that's
right, those types of things.
yeah, yeah. So taking care of yourself more and not
Hmm.
just um, as much as you possibly can, but
Right.
preferably every day a little bit. So on a constant basis.
And
Um,
and that's common sense. It's like if it's a student going through finals, or if it's somebody preparing for a big business, presentation or something. Cut out the TV, eat better, make sure you're sleeping, do those types of
yeah,
things. Take a look at your life and what do I need to maybe eliminate that's non-essential, so I have more time and energy for this thing that's going on. And there's a concept called your body is a machine with a limited supply of energy. And that's a very real thing.
Yeah.
Is we have so much energy, and when everything's going fine and you're healthy, your tank is full. And you got a lot of stuff going on in your life, maybe you got some illness or something going on. Now you maybe just have a half tank or a quarter tank when you get up. So you need to decide, where am I going to use that energy to my benefit the most effectively, right? Because again,
Right.
it's a machine with a limited supply of energy, and yet that's something that's hard for a lot of people, because they have this idea that I can just keep going, I can power through anything. I watch these movies, the guy's gotten shot, thrown out of an airplane, run over, and he's still
Yeah.
going, right?
Do that.
I could do that too, right?
Right. Right. Okay.
So,
I love that. I love that analogy though, because it's an important thing to understand that, because oftentimes we think that, there's even the name for it, which I don't know where the name comes from, but it certainly is ridiculous, selfish time. But it's not
yeah,
selfish; it's necessary,
right.
and it's required, and it's the thing that gives, as you said, it gives us energy, um,
Hmm.
and the thing that can help us keep going, and we're not. Um, our energy is not infinite, or it's
Yeah,
certainly not infinite in one day.
well, and yeah, it's always finite, and it's just some days you have more than others. And again, rather than selfish time, think of it more as self care, because it may have to do with just sitting down with your dog, or going for a walk, or calling up a good friend, sitting with your partner and just watching the sunset or something. Uh, it can be a whole lot of different things, but whatever it is that recharges you and helps you to kind of get back onto even keel again.
Yeah, I love that.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me, in terms of anxiety, and we kind of touched on it a little bit, but I really want to understand it really well. We kind of talked about you know triggers and things like that, and we talked about us having it in the past previously.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me, how does our past, so let's say our childhood, influence, or does it influence anxiety um, and our responses to it?
Well, it's the old, nature nurture argument. In fact, over in New Zealand, you had a wonderful study started back in, I think, 72, and they took everybody in Dunedin and that was born for a year, and it was 1,000 some odd people, and they started studying
Hmm.
them. And they started, they took medical stuff, psychological profiles, followed it, and they're still going on. So for 50 years, they've been studying these people. And they found, babies, young children about age 3, you can put them into 5 different categories. And like the middle group is your easygoing, fairly well-adjusted kids. And if those kids are in a normal, healthy family, they come out just really fine. You put them in a really abusive family, and then they're going to have problems, right?
Hmm.
You have your evil Knievel kids, the ones that are going to be the hang gliders and the, fly suit people and all that type of stuff. And that's about 10-15%, I think. And then you have a reserve group, children that are a little bit reserved, a little slow warming up. And normally they develop fine, but they'll be your people that are a little bit more standoffish as adults, but they function fine. You put them in an abusive family, and now you have some major problems come up. They become extremely shy, you have anxiety and stuff like that. Then you've got your kids that are extremely shy, which again, they can do okay in a healthy family, but if the family is dysfunctional, then they really suffer. And then you have your out of control kids, the ones that don't have a lot of self control, and they're the ones that have the most trouble growing up. And again, if they're in a healthy family, they do pretty well. So
Right.
wiring and personality plays a role into it. As I mentioned earlier,
Mhm.
people that I dealt with panic attacks, they tended to be good high achievers. They tended to be people that like to do things well. They had high expectations for themselves. Uh, Lots of times they had a lot of should must rules, the way things should be, the way I should act, that type of thinking was going on. And that would be a part of the
Yeah.
long term recovery too, is softening some of that type of
Yes.
thinking so that they
Yeah.
had a little bit broader area and things didn't have to be so rigid. Uh, so it's a combination of those things, and different things can happen with people. So if you have the sensitive wiring and you grow up in a really negative environment, it's going to affect you.
Right. Right. So,
Mhm.
and then it's going to, I guess, seep into then your adulthood. When you
Right.
are treating
and
anxiety.
I should probably say too, a kid who's kind of in that middle area, they need
Mhm.
more dysfunction to have stuff than a kid who has got the more sensitive wiring. Less will affect them. So again, there's that whole factor going on too.
Oh, okay. That's
Yeah,
interesting.
yeah.
Why is
But
that?
that well, it's just it happens to be. It's just like some people, you can get them out there on the football field, they'll do really well because their body's built for it. Other people aren't, right?
Right.
Because their body's not built for it. And so, same thing psychologically and mentally. We have different capacities. So you have a really sensitive person, a sensitive kid who's growing up in a very harsh, rigid background or family. Uh,
Mhm.
they're going to have a harder time with that than a kid who's on that other end of the spectrum and wired where it just rolls off their back, right? So,
Right.
and
Right.
that's kind of just common sense when you think of how kids interact with their environment.
Okay. Um, when you do help out, or when you're working with a client in terms of anxiety, or working, whatever it
Mm.
is, anger, or do you work in the past, or not necessarily work in the past, but do you cover the past? Do you uncover, the first trigger, or
Well, my first step is always to take an intake, and I do what's called a genogram, where I get a picture of their family, and they tell me what each person's like. And I usually say,
Mhm.
pretend you're like doing a movie, and you're just telling me what that person's characteristics would be like as a character in the movie, right? And then I have them give me some early recollections, early childhood, middle school, high school, and then early adulthood. And usually for that, I can guess at some of their core issues,
Yeah.
and they think I'm a genius, but it's all right there. It's not like it's hard to see, and some of that will oftentimes play into it. Again, if it's real dysfunctional, sometimes you have to address that stuff because it's also triggering the present. So, for example, I had a
Mhm.
gal came from a really abusive family, and the dad was especially abusive. She was working at a job where the her boss sounded and looked a lot like her dad. And so every time she had
Yeah.
to go in for a meeting with him, she was just having major anxiety, right? So we used a simple little technique called what's happening, what's real. What's happening, I'm reacting to my boss as if he's my dad. What's
Mhm.
real is I'm not in touch with my dad anymore. It's in the past. I'm an adult now. I can deal with things in an adult way. And besides, I'm just going in from our weekly meeting with my supervisor. He's not going to yell at me
Right.
like my dad. We're just going to talk. And
Mhm.
that doesn't stop the response, but it takes the edge off. And as she practiced that, after a few months, she got where she could talk to him and no longer responded to him. So that's what's
Okay.
happening. What's real idea works a lot when some of the triggers are from the past or related to the past, as opposed to where a person just had a stress reaction as an adult and that kicked it off. So it kind of depends on whether some of that stuff gets tangled up into it, which is very common.
Yeah. Okay. Wow. Thank you so much for explaining all that, and then for taking us through the process. Because
Mm-hmm.
it is so important for us to know and understand and know. There's a lot of awareness on anxiety now, which there should be. And a
Mm-hmm.
lot of people not knowing really how to handle it, and not knowing where they sit. And I think again, having a confirmation that having some anxiety, or having um, worry and things like that is part of life, and it's completely normal. Because I do see quite
Mm-hmm.
a lot, any type of little trigger is, considered as as a big deal
Right.
kind of, and it's, we do need to have anxiety in our life. It's part of our wiring and responses, and it helps to
And
keep us alive.
let me add one other thing. Having come out of the whole COVID years and stuff, and
Mm.
this was even before we had the internet, and now with the internet, first thing I would tell my anxiety clients is quit watching network news. If you're
Oh,
involved with a
yes.
lot
Yeah.
of if you want to stay informed, nowadays you can go to a news aggregate site. You can look at the headlines, click on any stories you
Yeah.
want to read, you get actually more news, and it's don't have all those sensational pictures coming at you. Spend 20, 30 minutes, read your news, get your hit for the day, and then leave it alone. Don't stay constantly involved with that. Same thing, these different news channels, whether they're the conservative or the liberal side, you don't want to get your head in that, just listening to it all day long and getting more and more inflamed and worried about stuff. Because especially that there's so much misinformation or half information comes out on issues, and everything is a crisis. When in actuality,
Absolutely.
you go look at everything that happened, a year or two ago, and you find there's so much of that stuff was not a crisis. So much of it was misinformation, and that's true for my whole entire life. You look at stuff a year or two later, and you find the real story is different from what was being presented. So be careful how you use that, and especially social media. Internet's
Yes.
great for dealing with friends, dealing with people you have an actual relationship with. But don't surf. Don't spend all that time just, following whoever the current popular people are, or looking at these images that are carefully curated and they're showing you all this. In fact, with young people especially, they have a thing called fear of missing out. And that's very prevalent among young people now, because they see all this stuff
Yes.
and they have this fear that they're missing out on all these wonderful things that everybody else is doing, when in actuality everybody else isn't doing them. So
Yes,
yeah,
but they would, yes. And then that is absolutely true, because if it wasn't, if the news didn't have the fear component or the crisis component in it, it wouldn't be very amusing. It would, it would just,
yeah.
it wouldn't bother, because there isn't anything threatening us. So therefore, why should I even bother reading it?
Uh, I remember one little news thing that they were talking to me about phobias. Then I watched it after it aired, and while we were talking about, they were showing these pictures of spiders and snakes and all kinds of stuff. And I'm thinking, if anybody's watching this who has a problem with it, they're going to turn this thing off right now.
Yeah,
So,
and
but
that's
that's our
and of
news
course,
media, right?
yes,
Yeah,
yes, and it needs to be, clickable. So there's obviously clickbait and things like that. Absolutely. And in
yeah,
terms of social media, 100%. I always say, when you're looking through social media, and and sometimes, especially nowadays, where you have the reels, and it's designed to keep you on the app as long as
oh, yeah,
possible, and it could be half an hour
yeah,
to an
yeah,
hour. When you
yeah,
do shut it down, that moment, think about, just take inventory, thinking about how you're feeling right now.
yeah,
How you're feeling about what you've just looked at, what is happening in your body, because that could also
yeah.
usually tell you about how you feel
Right.
about social media, whether it makes you feel good or it makes you feel bad. And
And and with the
if it
younger
makes you feel bad,
generation, right? Go ahead.
if it makes you feel bad or inadequate, or the shoulds come up or something like that, think about whether it was worth losing that
Yeah.
hour or 20 minutes or whatever it was on that. Come out feeling worse than you felt when you went into it.
Yeah, there's something called the positive psychology movement that started right around 2000, and they are looking for things that make people happy. Right? It's called the science of happiness in the news media. And there was a German study that was interesting. They took college students and just post-college age people, and they had them reduce the amount of time they spent on social media by 1 hour a day. And they
Yeah.
measured their satisfaction, happiness before and afterwards, and they were happier.
Yes.
And in addition, the other thing that I think is harder for younger people, people my age, I think, are more used to it, but younger people don't know how to be quiet. Having
Oh
quiet
no.
things that they do,
Yes.
so that your mind gets a chance to just ruminate and process all the stuff going on in your life. And again, that can be a walk with your dog, or sitting with your cat, or it can be just listening to music. It's different things for different people. It could be mowing the grass. I know a lady who her meditation time is mowing the grass with a hand lawnmower. She loves to do that because she
Yeah.
says she does her best thinking at those times. But having those times where you're not plugged into things, you're not being busy with something, is important for human health. Throughout most of human history, we had lots of time to think because everything was
No,
slow.
yeah,
And it's just
yeah.
in the last maybe 30 years or so that things have gotten so frenetic that, just every moment is filled with some kind of noise going on in your head.
Yeah, and we absolutely that quietness, stillness. Um, I even
Mm-hmm.
encourage my clients to feel bored because, and again, boredness is something that we run away from. You know, the moment that there is nothing
Mm-hmm.
to do, we try and find something to do. Our mind is constantly being overloaded, but
Mm-hmm.
it's in those moments in quietness and stillness and when we do our best thinking, we do our best creative thinking,
Yeah.
and this is where changes come from, and good changes. um,
Mm-hmm.
so it is so important, and unfortunately with things like technology, it is so easy to get
Yeah.
distracted.
Yeah, as a society, we're like adolescents with our technology. We're just learning how to manage it well. But we
Yes.
can. But you have to be
Yeah.
conscious about how you're dealing with it.
Yeah, and I think with everything, and then I
Mm-hmm.
certainly always discuss this with my clients. When you've been doing something, you kind of you do it as a low, and then when you discover that you're doing it and you want to do opposite of it, you usually go higher. So
Mm-hmm.
kind of flip it around, and you have the low lows and the high highs until you kind of figure it out that wait, I don't want to necessarily be up there or down there. Kind of want to be somewhere in the middle. So it takes that time to sometimes work it out and find that sweet spot.
Right.
Um, I think it's getting there with technology as well. I think we were high up and everybody was using it, and now we're talking about how having it constantly near us or around us or constantly looking at it is not necessarily the best thing for us, and people are
Right.
slowly starting to change and seeing the impact of it.
And
Thank
let
you
me say
so much for
too,
coming on.
one
Yes,
one
of
other
course.
quick thing is if you are having difficulty with anxiety is interfering with your life in some way, whether it's a simple phobia or panic attacks or whatever, there's a lot of help out there. There's books like my book, and if there's not anybody near you in your town or vicinity, the internet now has a lot of online resources that you can do online counseling with people, and it can be
Yep.
just as effective as face to face. So, seek
Yes.
help.
Yeah. Yeah,
So,
absolutely. And I love that.
hmm
When I was doing my study, one of the things that came up was if you've been suffering with anxiety, whatever it is that you're going to for more than 2 weeks, it is time
hmm
to, seek help. And it doesn't necessarily mean talking to a counselor. It just could mean just, reading a book about it or trying to understand it,
hmm
but not allowing it to dwell in your life and not allowing it to
right.
grow into, bigger than Big Ben. Big Ben. Where can people find your book and your YouTube channel? Because I think of it, there's so much to offer and to learn and to understand. So, do you want to tell us what is your YouTube channel and where can they find your book?
Easiest The easiest way to find it is go to whyemotions.com. So
Mhm.
whyemotions.com. And I have links there to the books. I have links to the YouTube channel. I have some free stuff. I have some like relaxation response things you can download and
Yeah.
just, a wide variety of things. It's kind of the hub where it shoots you out to everything else that I do. So whyemotions.com. Very easy to remember. Much easier than my name. So,
Yes. Yeah. Thank you so
so
much. We'll obviously put that in the description wherever
mm,
you're listening to this, so you're able to jump on there and have a look. So have a look at the
mm.
book. I certainly have, and it's brilliant. So thank you so much for coming on, and we'll hope to have you on again soon.
Yeah, it's been delightful. Thank you.
Thanks.